Russia is choking, not metaphorically, literally. At the Kerch Strait, the single artery that feeds occupied Crimea, the line between the Russian mainland and Putin's most prized possession, is being severed in slow motion, hour by hour, drone by drone, and there is nothing the Russian Federation can do to stop it. What you are witnessing is not a series of isolated raids. It is not nuisance harassment. It is not, as Russian state media keeps insisting, a propaganda stunt. What you are witnessing is the methodical strangulation of a strategic choke point by an enemy that has finally understood something the Kremlin has refused to accept since 2018. The Kerch Bridge was never a fortress. It was always a target waiting for the right weapon system. And in 2026, the right weapon system is here. It is cheap. It is plural. It is unmanned. And it is winning. This is not a story about a bridge. This is a case study in why an empire built on geographic assumptions collapses the moment those assumptions are tested by a smaller, faster, more adaptive enemy. Pull the lens back, because what is happening at the Kerch Strait right now is going to determine whether Russia can hold Crimea at all by the end of this war, and the Russian High Command knows it. Let me walk you through what this actually means at the strategic level. In April 2026, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, the HUR, confirmed that its active operations department had struck and disabled the Slavyanin, the last operational railway ferry in the Kerch Strait. The Slavyanin was not a side asset. It was the single remaining vessel capable of carrying rail cars across the strait after the Crimean Bridge's rail line was downgraded in the wake of repeated Ukrainian strikes. The Avangard, the secondary ferry, was damaged in the same operation. The Conroe Trader, the previous rail ferry, was already out of service. With the Slavyanin neutralized, Russia lost its ability to move heavy military rail freight to Crimea by water. Let that sink in for a moment. The largest country on earth, at war for over 4 years, can no longer get a railway car onto the Crimean Peninsula by sea. That is not a tactical setback. That is industrial-scale logistics failure. And it gets even more serious from here, because the Kerch Bridge, the surviving option, is no longer the symbol of Russian power Putin promised when he personally drove a truck across it in 2018. It has been hit by truck bomb in October 2022. It has been struck again in July 2023. It was attacked with underwater explosives on June 3, 2025, in an operation the SBU openly claimed and Russia openly minimized. Throughout late 2025 and into 2026, the bridge has been closed repeatedly, saying for Wang Xi or Wang Xin, and Anchor Wang String, and Kerch, sometimes for hours, sometimes for half a day, every time Ukrainian drones approach Crimea. On May 16, 2026, the bridge was shut for nearly 11 hours during a single overnight drone wave. Russia restricts truck traffic. Russia rotates inspection regimes. Russia stages decoy barges and smoke generators. None of it changes the underlying reality. The bridge can no longer be relied on as a wartime supply route. It can only be defended, and defended badly. Now rewind. Because to understand why this matters, you have to understand what Russian planners believed when they built the Kerch Bridge in the first place. The original Russian assumption was geometric. Crimea is a peninsula. The Black Sea was, by Russian doctrine, a Russian lake. The Kerch Strait was protected by the Black Sea Fleet, by coastal radar arrays, by Panzer S-1 and Tor M2 air defense batteries, by Su-30 fighter cover from Saki and Belbek, and by the largest single coastal defense complex the Russian Federation has built since the Cold War. The Kerch Bridge was treated as an unstrikable asset because the only credible threats, Wikandiri and Xianpri, Western anti-ship missiles, Western cruise missiles, Western aircraft, would never be released to Ukraine in numbers sufficient to penetrate that envelope. That was the assumption. That was the doctrine. And on paper, it looked overwhelming. On the actual battlefield, that assumption failed, catastrophically. The first mistake was not tactical. It was psychological. Russian planners assumed the threat would come from systems they could see, identify, classify, and track. They built their air defense lattice to defeat manned aircraft, conventional cruise missiles, and ballistic threats. They never planned for a swarm threat composed of $3,000 to $5,000 fixed-wing kamikaze drones flying at 100 meters in coordinated waves. They never planned for naval drones the size of a jet ski carrying 300 kilograms of explosives, traveling 800 kilometers from launch point to detonation. They never planned for an adversary that would treat the strait not as a fortified zone but as a saturation problem. Pull the lens back, because the saturation problem is the entire story. Ukraine has reorganized its strike doctrine around an idea Russian doctrine still cannot metabolize. The idea is simple. You do not need to destroy the Kerch Bridge to defeat it. You need to make the bridge unusable in any predictable, sustained, militarily meaningful way. You need to break the timetable. You need to break the convoy. You need to break the assumption that fuel, ammunition, armored vehicles, and rotation troops will arrive in Crimea on schedule. Once that assumption breaks, every Russian unit south of the strait begins to operate on a logistics clock that is no longer Russian-controlled. It is Ukrainian-controlled. This is the hidden military variable that mainstream coverage almost universally misses. Western press treats each Kerch Bridge incident as a discrete news event. Ukrainian special services treat it as a continuous campaign. The metric that matters is not how many spans collapsed. The metric that matters is how many hours per week the bridge is non-operational, how many tons of military cargo are queued and delayed, and how badly that delay degrades the combat power of the 18-plus brigade equivalents Russia maintains on the peninsula. By that metric, the only metric that matters in modern logistics warfare, Ukraine is already winning at Kerch, and Moscow knows it. This matters enormously because Crimea is not just real estate. Crimea is the southern hinge of the entire Russian campaign in southern Ukraine. The Russian forces holding Kherson Oblast east of the Dnipro, the Russian forces holding southern Zaporizhia, the Russian forces feeding the Donbass line from the south, I can feast you for in fee and receive that country, then recycle, all of them depend on a supply funnel that runs through the Kerch choke point or through the increasingly contested land bridge along the Sea of Azov. Strangle Kerch, and you do not just hurt Crimea. You begin to thin the entire southern Russian front, and it gets even more serious from here. In late April 2026, Ukrainian Magura 5 Sea drones, and increasingly the newer Magura 7 variant armed with modified R-73 air-to-air missiles repurposed as surface-to-air interceptors, struck Russian FSB patrol assets directly inside the Kerch Strait Protection Zone. A Project 12,200 Sobol-class patrol boat, designated by Russian sources as part of the border service detail guarding the bridge approaches, was destroyed. Open-source reporting confirmed by United 24, Militarny and Ukrainian operational sources indicated the entire 8-man FSB crew was killed. An anti-sabotage support boat in the same patrol pattern was damaged. Let me say that clearly. Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels, operated from launch points hundreds of kilometers away, killed an FSB security crew inside the inner defensive ring of Russia's most heavily protected maritime structure. That is not a propaganda claim. That is verified naval combat. What does it prove doctrinally? It proves that the Russian inner perimeter around the Kerch Bridge, the patrol screen designed to intercept exactly this kind of threat, is now contested space. It proves that the FSB border service cannot guarantee its own personnel survive a shift, and it proves that the Magura platform, originally written off by Russian analysts in 2023 as a fragile improvisation, has evolved into a multi-role naval system capable of anti-ship strike, anti-air engagement, and now anti-personnel saturation against fixed defensive assets. The Russian Black Sea Fleet has already retreated from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk because of this platform. Now its descendants are killing the guards of the bridge itself. This is the broader lesson, and it is the lesson Russian doctrine cannot absorb fast enough. Modern war is being decided by the asymmetry between the cost of attack and the cost of defense, and Magura V5 costs Ukraine roughly $250,000. The Panzer S-1 battery defending the Kerch approaches costs Russia approximately $15 million per system. A Russian Sobol patrol boat costs in the range of $3 to $4 million. The 8 trained FSB personnel aboard represent years of selection and training. Ukraine can build and field dozens of Maguras for the price of one Pantsir. Russia cannot produce Pantsir S-1 batteries at the rate Ukraine produces Sea drones. The math does not balance. It will never balance. And every month it does not balance, the Kerch choke point gets thinner. Now let me walk you through the industrial level because the bridge story does not exist in isolation. Ukraine's long-range strike campaign through the second half of 2025 and into 2026 has systematically degraded Russia's refining capacity. By Reuters' own reporting in late September 2025, fuel shortages had spread to more than 10 Russian regions. Crimea itself was among the hardest hit. In October 2025, the Moscow-installed governor of Crimea, Sergei Aksyonov, raised the per-person gasoline purchase limit to 30 liters per day, not as a generosity, but as a rationing reform. Rationing, in a region Moscow insists is fully integrated into the Russian Federation. Civilian rationing, and every drop of that rationed fuel has to either cross the Kerch Bridge under threat of closure or arrive by truck convoy along the contested land corridor through Melitopol, which itself sits within range of Ukrainian HIMARS, ATACMS, Long Neptune, and indigenous deep strike drones. This is the larger pattern. The Kerch choke point is not a single problem for Russia. It is the visible peak of a logistics iceberg that is simultaneously being attacked at the refinery, at the rail node, at the ferry, at the storage depot, at the patrol boat, and at the air defense battery. Ukraine has industrialized a kill chain that Russia industrialized nothing to counter, because Russian planners were planning to fight NATO, and Ukraine never fought like NATO. Ukraine fought like a swarm. Pull the lens back again, because the climax of this campaign is still ahead, and the operational signatures are already visible. The Long Neptune cruise missile, which Ukrainian sources and President Zelensky publicly confirmed in 2025, now has a claimed range of approximately 1,000 kilometers. That range envelope places not just the Kerch Bridge, but the entire eastern Crimean coast, the Russian Black Sea Fleet's relocation port at Novorossiysk, and the Krasnodar refining complex inside Ukrainian land attack reach from launch positions deep inside Ukrainian territory. Combine Long Neptune with the Magura V-7, carrying R-73-derived interceptors. Combine that with the Ukrainian fixed-wing strike drones, now routinely flying 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers. Combine that with sea drones carrying first-person view sub-drones. When Tafri make to can pre your Ukraine has tested in 2025 and 2026, and you do not have a single strike weapon. You have a layered, mutually reinforcing, attritable, replicable strike complex. Russia has nothing comparable in the theater. Russia is, at this moment, fighting a 2026 war with a 2014 logistics network. And this is the moment in the analysis where mainstream framing collapses entirely. Western media keeps asking the wrong question. Western media keeps asking, will Ukraine drop the bridge? Will the spans collapse? Will there be a dramatic, photogenic moment of structural failure? That is not the right question. The right question is the one Russian general staff officers are asking behind closed doors right now, and it is this: when exactly did the Kerch Bridge stop being a usable wartime logistics asset, and what does it mean that we did not notice the transition? Because that transition has already happened. The bridge is open on paper. It is closed in practice. The truck traffic is allowed. The schedules are unreliable. The rail line is restricted. The ferry alternative is gone. The patrol boats are dying. The fuel is rationed. The air defenses are being attrited. And every single one of those data points was produced not by a single decisive strike, but by a deliberate, patient, layered campaign of attritional pressure that Russian doctrine never accepted as a category of warfare. Let that sink in. The largest country in the world, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, a self-declared great power with a defense budget north of $140 billion, has lost effective control of a maritime choke point inside its own claimed sovereign territory to an adversary that builds its naval drones in repurposed civilian workshops. There is no doctrinal vocabulary in the Russian General Staff Academy that explains how this is supposed to happen. There is no precedent in Soviet OPER.